I should have walked out the second Chad ordered his second bourbon before appetizers even showed up. But no, like the good little HR puppet I was apparently supposed to be, I stayed seated, napkin on lap, smile stitched in place like I hadn't already pictured 6 different ways to jam his Rolex up his entitled throat. We were 3 bites into a Caesar salad when he leaned back, laughing that smug, loose-jaw laugh of his. The one that always came right before he said something that made everyone else at the table suddenly fascinated by their bread rolls. "Still in HR?" he asked, voice dripping with casual cruelty, like I was the office plant that accidentally learned to talk. Must be cozy watching the grown-ups handle the real numbers. I blinked once, smiled twice, because if I didn't, I might have flung my fork right into his forehead and shouted, "HR files homicide reports too, Chad." Instead, I chewed my crouton so hard, my molar cracked. That's the trick, isn't it? HR learns to swallow things that would make lesser people choke, like being called just HR after 12 years of cleaning up executive tantrums, mopping up merger blood, and keeping Chad's company out of half a dozen wrongful termination suits he never even knew existed. But here's the kicker. I'd already quit. Chad didn't know it, but 5 days earlier, I'd submitted my resignation under NDA, effective end of quarter. Because while he was flexing his MBA over whiskey, I was already deep in talks with Helix Corp. Yes, that Helix Corp. The American tech powerhouse his own CEO had been begging to partner with. The call hadn't come from a recruiter. It came from the Helix board chair herself. She said they needed someone who knew more than numbers. Someone who understood people, power, and how to make men like Chad self-destruct with a smile on their face. So while Chad droned on about his CrossFit totals and his son's game-changing startup, I sipped my water and imagined his face when he'd find out I was about to lead Helix Corp's side of a $200 million joint venture his team was already sabotaging. But pause for a second, because if you've ever been called just anything, just HR, just admin, just an assistant, you're exactly the kind of person who ends up having the last laugh in stories like this. If you want more of those, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and throw a like. Corporate carnage tastes better when it's cold. Anyway, back to Chad. Lunch ended with him clapping my shoulder like we were college buddies, saying something about catching up next quarter. He walked out oblivious, carrying every ounce of fuel I needed to burn his reputation to the ground. Back at the office, my farewell coffee break was being planned. Store-bought cake, misspelled banner, a card someone forgot to circulate. The works. I wasn't mad. I was detached, surgical. Because while they debated frosting flavors, I was reviewing Helix Corp's internal audit on Falcon Systems, Chad's company. And let me tell you, it read like a slow-motion car crash narrated by an unpaid intern. The missed clauses, the expired renewal notices, the same risk templates I'd helped write years ago, all buried under arrogance and dust. That's when it hit me. The only thing worse than being underestimated is being underestimated by someone who should know better. Because when you forget that the quiet woman taking notes in the corner wrote the playbook, you don't just look stupid. You sign the wrong line and hand her the keys to your kingdom. The binder Chad waved off during our last compliance sync, I built half the templates in it. That onboarding girl he mocked? She was quoting my SOPs verbatim, and the clause they'd skipped in the JV agreement. I wrote it, buried it, and now I was going to use it. Funny thing about being just HR. We know where all the bodies are buried because we're the ones who bought the shovels. It all started with a blocked number. Normally, I wouldn't answer. But something colder than intuition whispered pickup. "This is Lauren Reed," I said. "Ms. Reed, this is Camille Atkins calling on behalf of Helix Corp. We'd like to discuss an urgent executive opportunity. Are you available this afternoon?" My stomach tightened. Helix Corp? The same name that made our IT team sweat bullets whenever it came up in procurement meetings? I wasn't dreaming. The hunt had already begun. And this time, I was the one setting the trap. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Helix Corp didn't call people like me. They called CFOs, VPs, consultants who played golf on Tuesdays. Not the woman who used to hand out harassment policy pamphlets and quietly save the company from self-destruction. "Is this about a referral?" I asked, still scanning my LinkedIn in my head, wondering which of my old colleagues had dropped my name. "No," Camille said, her voice cool, practiced, but not robotic. "This is about you." An hour later, I was staring at 5 faces on a video call, one from legal, one from strategy, one from finance, one from risk, and front and center, Helix Corp's chairman of the board. Not some assistant with a script. The real deal. They'd had a CFO forced out mid-quarter after an NDA breach linked to insider trading. The position was vacant, bleeding money, and politically radioactive. They needed someone who could walk into a fire and not just survive, but rebuild the structure before the smoke cleared. The project in question? A $200 million joint venture between Helix Corp and Falcon Systems. "My old company," I nearly laughed. "You're dealing with Falcon?" I asked, keeping my tone even, though my brain was already running through names, departments, and skeletons buried in compliance folders. "Unfortunately," the strategy lead replied, "their internal coordination has been lacking." That was corporate speak for dumpster fire, and I knew exactly why. Chad Morrison, Falcon's senior VP of business development, the man who thought arrogance counted as strategy. I listened, silent, as they explained the need for an interim CFO, a 6-month term with full control over the JV's budget, reporting, and renegotiation authority. Normally, they'd hire a financial lifer, some gray-haired number cruncher with a pedigree and an ego. But this wasn't a normal project. This was damage control wrapped in diplomacy and served with a side of war. "I'll need to tender a resignation," I said. "Of course," the chairman nodded. Quietly. "NDA will cover all public communication. A courier will deliver your contract tonight. You'll sign by morning." When the call ended, I sat there for a full minute, staring at my reflection on the black screen. It wasn't joy I felt. It was precision, focus, the sharp calm that comes right before you make a move that changes everything. By midnight, the contract was sitting in my driveway, sealed in a black folder. I signed it under the kitchen light while my husband slept down the hall, still thinking I'd spend next week debating frosting flavors at my farewell party. Poor guy thought I cared about cake. I cared about leverage. The next morning, I walked into Falcon Systems like it was any other Tuesday. Navy blazer, calm smile, resignation letter already delivered by courier hours before sunrise. Only the COO knew. He gave me a look in the hallway that said, "I don't want to know, but I definitely know." Smart man. By lunchtime, they'd picked vanilla frosting. How poetic. I smiled, signed the card addressed to myself, took a polite bite, and left early. "Off-site meeting," I said. Technically true, just not for Falcon. Because in less than 48 hours, I'd be sitting across from their executive team again, only this time on the other side of the table. Badge reading, Lauren Reed. Chief Financial Officer, Helix Corp. The sheet cake said, "Good luck, Lauren," in blue icing that looked like a toddler's art project. The conference room smelled like reheated Costco quiche and regret. HR had done their best. Drooping balloons, a crooked banner, store-brand coffee. People milled around pretending to care, checking their watches between fake smiles. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean, cold, detached, like a surgeon before the first incision. This wasn't revenge. It was transformation. Me shedding the old uniform of invisibility for something sharper. Chad strolled in 20 minutes late, of course, wearing his jacket slung over one shoulder like he was auditioning for Wolf of Wall Street, the midlife crisis edition. He laughed too loud, ignored the tension, and zeroed in on me. "Hey, Lauren, didn't miss the cake, did I?" The room froze. He grabbed a slice barehanded and took a bite big enough to choke a horse. "So," he said, grinning, "early retirement or just moving to that mythical land where HR people go when they stop pretending to work?" People chuckled nervously. I didn't. I just looked at him, really looked at him, the way you look at a problem you've already solved. In 48 hours, I'd be the one signing the documents that determined whether his division survived Q4. And he didn't even know it yet. He wiped frosting from his chin with a paper napkin, still smirking like he owned the room. I held his gaze long enough for him to shift in his seat, that tiny flicker of confusion that comes when arrogance meets a wall it can't climb. He mumbled something about catching up soon, then strutted out, phone already at his ear, looking for an audience that didn't exist. Around me, a few coworkers muttered half-hearted apologies for his behavior. I smiled, waved it off. "It's fine," I said, and it was, because I didn't need an apology from Chad Morrison. I needed his overconfidence. I needed him to keep believing I'd always be the one sitting quietly in the corner while he played boss. That belief was the rope he'd hang himself with. 10 minutes later, I collected the mug I didn't want, signed a farewell card someone had shoved under my door with 3 signatures, best wishes, don't be a stranger, and cake was good, and walked out of the building without looking back. The security guard waved. "See you Monday, Ms. Reed." I smiled. "No, you won't." Helix Corp's headquarters in downtown Seattle felt like another planet. Glass and chrome, silent elevators, and a kind of efficiency that hummed like a power grid. No passive-aggressive whiteboards, no sticky notes on the break room fridge, just clean light and the quiet weight of billion-dollar ambition. The courier had already dropped off my new badge that morning. Activated, access granted. No HR pamphlets, no awkward onboarding video. Just a key card, a black folder, and a single note. "Welcome to the top floor." At precisely 8:03 a.m., I stepped into my new office. No nameplate yet, just CFO, interim. I didn't mind. Blank slate suited me. By 8:10, I was on a call with Helix Corp's legal team reviewing the bleeding wound that was the Falcon joint venture. I didn't even need them to finish the first sentence. I knew the smell of a Chad-shaped disaster before they said a word. Falcon had missed 3 key compliance benchmarks, each one tied to million-dollar incentives. Real penalties, not theoretical. Clause 7.3b, Vendor Performance Thresholds. Clause 11.2, Quarterly Compliance Audits. Appendix D, Dispute Escalation Triggers. They'd missed every single one. It wasn't just sloppy, it was dangerous. The kind of negligence that came with email trails and timestamps, the kind that ended in lawsuits or headlines. I leaned back, listening, calm and clinical. The finance lead, a quiet numbers-first guy named Drew, was still walking me through the details when I interrupted. "Hold on," I said, flipping through the binder Helix Corp had prepped. The paper felt familiar. Too familiar. "This clause," I said, tapping the page, "is mine." Silence. Drew blinked. "Yours?" "I helped draft the original language when I was still at Falcon," I said. "I know exactly how this contract breathes." He whistled under his breath. "Well, damn." The path forward was suddenly clear. Renegotiate the contract to stop the hemorrhaging, enforce penalties, and rebuild the reporting system from scratch. And I had all the leverage I needed, written in my own words, buried in fine print Chad's team had ignored. By 10 a.m., I'd flagged 12 potential breaches. By noon, I'd drafted a memo to the Helix board outlining Falcon's risk exposure. By 2, I was leading a strategy huddle with legal and risk to prepare the renegotiation timeline. At 3:25 p.m., Helix Corp's CEO, Arvind Patel, appeared at my door. No entourage, no introduction. Just him, composed and sharp, the kind of executive who didn't waste words. "They tell me you came in like a scalpel," he said. I shrugged. Chad handed me the patient with a pulse and no heartbeat. "I'm just here to resuscitate, or pronounce." He smiled slightly. "Do what you need to do." Then he left. No ceremony, just permission. I stayed until almost 9 that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's something intoxicating about being underestimated your entire career, and then, suddenly, being handed the keys to the kingdom. It's like being mistaken for the valet and driving off with the entire dealership. Chad didn't know I was here. Not yet. But soon, he'd walk into a room he thought he controlled, open a binder he thought was his shield, and find my fingerprints on every single page. The breach alert came just before dawn, buried in an urgent email from Helix Corp Legal titled JV Exposure, Immediate Review. I was already awake, half running on caffeine and momentum, reviewing Falcon's vendor logs while the rest of the city still slept. The message was short, clinical, but the implications were enormous. Falcon had failed to submit its Q3 environmental compliance report, specifically the wastewater treatment data from its Nevada site. That single omission triggered a violation of federal disclosure obligations under the joint venture's operating agreement. The exposure? $20 million per month. Not theoretical. Real. Clock-ticking, shareholder-terrifying exposure. My eyes tracked every line of the email, each sentence landing like a gavel. Clause 9.1. Breach penalties and mitigated revisions. I'd fought to get that clause approved 3 years ago when Falcon was still negotiating with Helix. It allowed Helix to reopen terms if any breach created more than $10 million in financial exposure for 2 consecutive quarters. We were 6 weeks in. The threshold was long past. Chad had effectively handed me the detonator with a bow on it. The legal team scheduled a 10 o'clock a.m. crisis meeting. But I didn't wait. I reopened my old drafts, the original red lines I'd written back when I was just the HR woman in the negotiation room. I could still remember arguing with Falcon's old COO over keeping 9.1 intact. He wanted softer language, collaborative correction, joint resolution, accountability workshops. I'd pushed back. Collaboration without consequence is a group hug in a burning building, I told him. Now, those words were a loaded weapon pointed squarely at Falcon's leadership. By 10:23, we were in the war room, literally. Helix Corp reserved a glass-walled conference vault for high-stakes sessions, all chrome and silence. Legal, risk, compliance, strategy, everyone was there, eyes flicking toward me. "We invoke 9.1, I said. No hesitation, but we don't go in swinging blind. The room quieted. We need someone they'll underestimate, someone they think they can control, someone who knows their system better than they do. Camille from strategy tilted her head. "You volunteering?" "I'm offering," I replied, sliding a 1-page brief across the table. With one condition: we let Falcon think it was their idea. The trap was set in motion that afternoon. Helix's legal department sent a polished memo to Falcon Systems. Due to recent financial exposure stemming from operational delays, Helix Corp intends to exercise Clause 9.1 to review and renegotiate terms of the joint venture. Polite, measured, impossible to ignore. They had 5 business days to respond. By 7:42 p.m., Falcon's CEO replied personally. You could read the panic between the lines. Escalating issue, potential realignment, open to immediate discussion. Corporate speak for, "We're bleeding. Please be gentle." He suggested a face-to-face session to maintain partnership spirit. Then Chad chimed in. Of course he did. He replied all to the CEO's thread, suggesting Helix send someone senior but familiar to handle the meeting, someone who understood Falcon's structure but wasn't too high-level to get defensive. I actually laughed out loud in my office. There it was. proof that Chad still thought of me as background noise, a support function in heels. He didn't even realize I was copied on the thread. Arvin, our CEO, forwarded it to me with 2 words. Your call. That night, I stayed in the office past 10, drafting the meeting agenda. 4 pages, bulletproof. It started with historical compliance benchmarks and ended with proposed penalty adjustments. No grandstanding, just numbers, clauses, and cold math. At the bottom, I typed my name and title in black ink. Lauren Reed, Chief Financial Officer, Helix Corp., no italics. No bold, just power. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It arrives and rearranges the air. Camille passed by my office door, coffee in hand. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She said. I didn't even deny it. There's something satisfying about letting a man build his own execution chamber out of paperwork, I said. She grinned. Just make sure you leave the door open long enough for him to realize it. Oh, I said, closing the binder with a soft click. He'll realize it, just not before he sits down. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because of clarity. That perfect electric stillness before a storm when you realize you're the one steering it. My kitchen looked like a war room. 4 binders open, color-coded tabs scattered like confetti, 2 laptops glowing under the sharp light, and 1 cat sitting squarely on the most important spreadsheet, as if sent by Chad himself to sabotage me. Didn't matter. I'd already memorized every key breach point. He could have sent in the ghost of PowerPoints past, and I'd still have my foot on his company's neck before lunch. The binder I built wasn't thick, just lethal. A surgical record of every fumbled benchmark, every unfiled audit, every oversight that screamed we stopped caring months ago. I marked each section with a color code. Compliance breaches in crimson, audit failures in gray, and Chad's personal mistakes in gold. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. At 10:11 p.m., my inbox pinged. Subject line, quick favor, from Chad Morrison. CC'd were Falcon's CEO, Falcon Legal, 2 random VPs, and, judging by one of the addresses, possibly his golf buddy. The email read like a frat boy apology, scrawled on a cocktail napkin. Hey Lauren, saw Helix wants to reopen some JV stuff. Fun, right? Was wondering if you're still in HR or involved somehow. Maybe you could smooth things over? Keep it casual. No need to make this a big courtroom vibe. Thanks. Chad. I stared at the screen, stunned but not surprised. Still in HR. Keep it casual. The man was about to walk into a corporate tribunal and thought it was a networking brunch. For one brief moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I remembered his smirk at that farewell party. The way he called me support staff in front of a client. No, this moment needed documentation. I hit reply all. Subject. Quick favor. Body, you'll see me tomorrow. Signature. Lauren Reed, Chief Financial Officer, Helix Corp. I didn't add a single word more. Just that line, that title. The bullet made of pixels he'd never see coming. I clicked send, leaned back, and watched the email vanish into corporate history. At 11:03, my phone buzzed. A text from Arvin, Helix's CEO. Want me in the room? I'll clear my morning. I thought about it. About how powerful it would look to have the CEO sitting beside me, silent, deadly, radiating authority. But no, this wasn't about intimidation. It was about balance. About letting Chad feel like the room was still his until he realized it wasn't. No, I typed back. This needs to be personal. He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji and a gif of a guillotine. Professionalism, Helix style. By midnight, the binder was done. It wasn't just paperwork. It was judgment in tabbed format. 3 parts. 1. Here's what you promised. 2. Here's where you failed. 3. Here's what it will cost you. I slid it into a black leather folio, no logo, no name, just weight. The kind of thing that changes oxygen levels when it hits a boardroom table. I didn't dream that night. Didn't need to. The real dream was already waiting for morning. A glass room, a long table, and a man who still thought HR meant harmless. Falcon's conference floor looked panic-cleaned when I arrived. Chairs polished, cables coiled, bottled water lined like soldiers. A room dressed for surrender. Through the frosted glass, I could already hear Chad's voice. Too loud, too confident. "They'll probably send someone junior from compliance," he was saying. "No need to panic. It's just a friendly chat." The elevator dinged. I stepped out, heels sharp against marble. Click, click, click. Each sound measured like a countdown. I didn't pause to knock, just pushed open the door and walked in like I was returning to a crime scene with immunity. Every head turned. Chad froze mid-sentence. His smile stalled halfway, that slow realization crawling across his face as he tried to make sense of me standing there. "Lauren?" he managed. I set the binder down. Thud. "Good morning," I said evenly. "Let's begin." The silence after I spoke stretched long enough to make the air feel heavy. Falcon's CEO half stood from his chair, blinking like someone realizing too late that the house was already on fire. "You're leading this?" he asked, his voice caught somewhere between confusion and dread. "From Helix Corp?" "Yes," I said simply, opening the black folio and sliding a copy of the agenda across the table. "I'm here on behalf of Helix Corp as the Chief Financial Officer. We're invoking Clause 9.1 under the JV agreement." My tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Authority doesn't yell. It resonates. Chad Morrison, just sat there, jaw slack, color draining from his face like someone had unplugged him from his own ego. "You're with them?" he croaked finally. I looked him dead in the eye. I am them. You could feel it then, the shift in the room, the slow tilt of power as every executive present recalibrated their loyalty in real time. Falcon's general counsel straightened in her seat. Their CFO suddenly found the label on his water bottle fascinating. And Chad? He looked like someone who'd just realized the safety net was actually a trap door. I flipped open the binder, each page marked, tabbed, and color-coded within an inch of its life. "Let's begin with performance benchmarks missed in Q3, I said. "And the resulting exposure, $20 million per month, according to your own reporting delays." Falcon's CEO cleared his throat. We can discuss those figures in context." I held up a hand, calm but firm. "You've had 6 weeks of context. Now we're discussing consequence." The CEO fell silent. Across the table, Chad shifted, shoulders tense, his mouth twitching like he wanted to argue but couldn't find a foothold. "Under Clause 9.1, I continued, Helix Corp has the right to renegotiate or terminate the joint venture without financial liability, given the material breach and continued risk exposure." Chad finally snapped. "You can't be serious," he said, voice cracking. "Penalties? Audits every 2 weeks? This isn't a prison camp, Lauren." I looked at him, not angry, not even triumphant, just steady. "You're right, Chad. This isn't a prison camp. It's a partnership. But you turned it into a liability. And Helix Corp doesn't invest in liabilities. It audits them." The words landed like a hammer. Falcon's CFO swallowed hard. Their legal counsel started taking frantic notes. Chad's hand twitched toward his binder, flipping through pages he clearly hadn't read before. I kept my tone precise. Section 4 of the revised agreement introduces mandatory third-party audits, biweekly performance reviews, and a retroactive penalty of $10 million per quarter for any missed deliverables, effective immediately. The CFO's pen froze mid-air. The CEO looked ready to faint. Chad leaned forward, desperation creeping in. "This is insane. You're overstepping. You can't." I met his eyes. "I wrote the clause, Chad. You signed it. If you want to argue authorship, be my guest." He opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. Just the faint rasp of a man realizing too late that he'd built his own gallows. Then, the conference room's large screen flickered to life. The Helix Corp logo appeared, followed by a live video feed. Arvind Patel, our CEO, stepped into frame, calm, deliberate, looking every bit like a man used to holding nations, not companies, accountable. "Morning," he said smoothly. "Hope I'm not late." Falcon's executives collectively stiffened. "Not at all," I replied, glancing up at the screen. "We're just finishing the overview." Arvind smiled faintly. "I read the revisions. Surgical work, Lauren." His gaze shifted to Falcon's CEO. "Clean up your house. You've had warnings, you've had notices, and now you have consequences." Falcon's CEO tried to regain footing. "We can't possibly agree to these terms overnight." Arvind's expression didn't change. "Then don't. Just remember, every day you delay costs you $20 million. He paused, turned to me. "Triple it." The room went silent. I shook my head slightly. "Not necessary. The original penalties will do the job." He gave a nod. "Your call, CFO. I'll leave you to it." The screen blinked dark again, leaving nothing but stunned silence behind. Falcon's CEO looked like he'd swallowed glass. Chad was pale, his knuckles white against the table. I closed the binder gently and slid it toward them. "You'll have 24 hours to review and sign," I said evenly. "Otherwise, Helix Corp will initiate full withdrawal procedures." No anger, no gloating, just the quiet, final tone of a verdict delivered. For a long moment, no one spoke. You could hear the faint hum of the air vent, the scratch of a pen rolling across the table. Falcon's CEO looked at the document like it might bite him. Their general counsel's hand trembled as she flipped through the pages, eyes darting between clauses like maybe, just maybe, she could find a loophole that didn't exist. There wasn't one. I'd written this language myself 3 years ago, and I'd built it airtight. Finally, the CEO exhaled, slow and resigned. "We'll sign," he said quietly, not looking at anyone. The pen in his hand hovered, then touched paper. The sound of ink scratching the signature line was almost ceremonial, like the last shovelful of dirt landing on a grave. He pushed the folder back toward me with shaking fingers. "Effective immediately," I said, closing it with a soft click. "Greg." He stopped himself, caught, corrected. "Chad, stay behind." The rest of the executives filed out in uneasy silence. The general counsel closed the door softly behind her, like she didn't want to disturb the scene that was about to happen. The glass walls made the whole thing feel like a confessional booth in a modern cathedral. Just 2 people, silence, and consequence. Chad sat there with his hands tented in front of him, staring at the table. All the bravado was gone. No smirk, no swagger, just a hollow man trying to understand how the game flipped without him noticing. He looked smaller now, like someone had drained the air from him. I rested my palms lightly on the table and leaned forward. "You know," I said, my voice calm, almost kind, "I was never just HR." He flinched. Just slightly, but enough. The word hit him harder than I expected. "I was your compliance watchdog, the one who flagged the risks you ignored. I was your exit clause, written in plain English you never bothered to read. I was your safeguard, buried in folders you told your assistant to delete because they didn't come with pretty charts. I slid a small black card across the table, letting it stop just short of his fingers. He stared at it like it might explode. The letters were embossed, silver on matte black. Lauren Reed, Chief Financial Officer, Helix Corp. No tagline, no slogan, just truth. You'll want to update your contact list, I said softly, or your lawyer. His lips parted, but no words came out. Just the hollow sound of a man who'd spent years talking over people and suddenly had nothing left to say. I straightened, gathering the binder under my arm. Behind him, the skyline stretched across the glass. Seattle glittering, indifferent, already moving on. You know, Chad, I added, pausing by the door. HR doesn't just know where the bodies are buried. I turned slightly, met his eyes one last time. We're the ones who buy the shovels. And then I walked out. Each step echoed, sharp, deliberate, measured. No applause, no dramatics, just heels clicking against tile like a gavel closing court. Click, click, click. The corridor outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I passed Falcon's receptionist, who looked at me with a nervous half-smile, sensing something had shifted, but not knowing what. Mr. Morrison still in the meeting? She asked. He's wrapping up, I said. By the time I reached the elevators, my phone buzzed. A message from Arvin. Heard they signed. Surgical strike, Lauren. Nicely done. I typed back one word. Closure. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught my reflection in the mirrored steel. The same navy blazer. The same calm face. But something fundamental had changed. I wasn't the woman waiting for recognition anymore. I was recognition. I'd spent 12 years keeping men like Chad from burning down their own companies, and for the first time, I'd let the fire do its work. Downstairs, the lobby sunlight spilled across marble floors, and I realized I was smiling. Not out of triumph, but relief. There's a freedom in finally stepping out of someone else's shadow and realizing it was never shelter, just shade. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of sirens from the financial district, a reminder that somewhere a company's PR team was probably scrambling. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I took one last look at the city, the gleaming skyline, the tower I'd left behind, and whispered to myself with quiet satisfaction, never just HR. Then I walked toward the future I'd already built. One clause, one signature, one perfect reckoning at a time.